What's going on, guys? It's a brand new year, and what better way to start out the year than with a hat format tier list? And I've had a lot of people asking me my opinion on the current hat format meta, and in general, I haven't done a meta tier list at all. I've done other deck difficulty tier lists and talking about floodgates and all different types of tier lists, but not a hat format tier list for the meta. So this will be a first, and hopefully you guys had a good New Year's and are ready for more great hat format content. I tried to take some of my more favorite and just in general the more popular decks in hat format. I'm not going to go over all of the lower end decks, but there could be a couple that I missed in general. So if I did, definitely comment that in the comment section. There is a lot of different decks in hat format as it is an extremely diverse format. So it's very possible I missed out on some of those, but I wanted to go over what I would consider to be the majority of the meta. And so, in a sense, that's why these decks are here. I think all of these decks, in some capacity, are actually very strong decks, and they have had tops and different things like that. And so let's go over the tier lists real quickly, or the tiers that I have. I have tier 1, obviously the best of the best. Tier 1.5, also great options. Tier 2 are decks that are pretty solid, not necessarily the top of the top, or maybe they don't top as much as some of the other decks. Solid Rogue, these are the decks that definitely are really good options. They can take games off of the top decks, and just in general, they might not be as popular as, say, some of the other decks. And then the good pilot is going to be the decks that either need a little more representation to actually be shown as a solid rogue option, or you'll see one maybe pop up here and there, but they aren't necessarily commonly topping. So those are the tiers I have, and so let's get straight into it. So starting off, the first deck is Hat, Hand Artifact Trap Tricks. Obviously, this is tier 1. Hat is always topping, and just in general, it's such a good, solid deck. Whether you're a beginner or, the competitive scene, this is just like your go-to option. It's why the format is called what it is. So definitely can't go wrong there. Lightsworn or Lightsworn Ruler. This one I might have to move around a little bit. I'm gonna say that it's probably in the tier 2 status. Now, again, tier 1, 1.5, and 2 are all very close in terms of, what I said before on how they top and different things and how powerful they are. The thing with Lightsworn Ruler is I feel like in terms of online play, it doesn't top or see as much representation as, say, Lightsworn Ruler does in person. I don't exactly know why that is, but in general, it's a strong deck. The fact that you have to kind of rely on the gamble of your mills makes it slightly less good. But again, it could kind of fall in 1.5, but I would say 2 is probably the best place to put it. Next, we have this is Plant Ruler. Plant Ruler, I think, is a really good deck. It doesn't see as much play as it should, and for that reason, I'm going to put in Good Pilot. I think a Good Pilot could definitely top with this, and I could see if this deck started seeing more representation, it could definitely move up to the Solid Rogue or even potentially the Tier 2 status, but simply for the fact that not a lot of people actually play this version. They prefer the either Mythic Ruler version or the Hieratic Ruler. I'm going to put it there. Next, we have Bujin. Bujin, I'm going to put in 1.5. I think it's a very solid deck. It always has been a good option. It can change up its playstyle based on if there's more combo decks in the format or slower decks. It is somewhat normal summon reliant, but in general, it has a great grind game and it can pull out wins that you probably wouldn't expect because Bujin Carnation is just a crazy, crazy card. So I think definitely 1.5 is a great place to put it. Next, we have gadgets. This could be tin gadgets or whatever you want to call it. This is a pretty solid deck. I'm going to put it in solid rogue. When it does its thing, it definitely, is very solid. It's extremely consistent given everything searches, so you always have some form of follow-up. It can play good back row as well, and so I definitely think Solid Rogue is a good spot for it. You could almost move it down to good pilot, as I feel like it hasn't done as much as it has in the past. But in general, I think Solid Rogue is a good place. Next, we have raccoons. There's a lot of different builds of raccoons, so I think partially this could come down to what version you're actually choosing to play. I know I've done deck profiles on so far just the more pile version of the deck, and I think it's a very good deck. But that being said, it doesn't really see a lot of representation. Occasionally, it'll get a top here and there, and it always feels like a good deck. But the fact you kind of have to play a handful of mishmash in the whole like idea of the deck, whether that's playing things like Key Mouse or the whole handful of different random beast type tuners and things that you just kind of have to play. I think that Raccoon is perfect there. I guess one other thing I should mention if you've got to this point is I do have deck profiles for a lot of these decks. Not all of them, I'll eventually get to all of them, but most of the ones here. So if you're interested in any of the deck profiles, I'll have a link to my deck playlist where you can go and check out all the different decks in the description. So check that out. But anyways, back to the tier list. Next, we have Sylvan. Sylvan is a great option. I think this falls. It's kind of interesting. This is another deck that kind of feels like Lightsworn, where it's like you see it a lot, but you don't see it a lot. So I almost want to put it in tier 2, but it's also kind of like a 1.5. I'll put it right here for now. That might change. Again, it is a very solid deck. It doesn't feel like it's doing as much as it used to. Maybe I'll put it here for now, actually. I'll put it right at the front of tier 2. Again, tier 1, 1.5, and 2 are all very similar. Next, we have Infernity. Infernity, I'm going to put right in between these two at tier 2. Don't get me wrong, Infernity is a crazy, crazy deck. It's my favorite deck of all time, and it's one of those decks that I hate to say sees more tops in person than it does online. And part of the reason is sadly because of cheating. Obviously, everyone knows the joke of setting monsters in your spell and trap card zone, not artifacts, obviously, but it's a great deck. When it goes off, it goes off, and when you have a good player with it who knows all the different lines, it's even better. I think also, besides, what I had mentioned before, this deck is very complicated. The different lines you have to go through and know how to play around certain hand traps and different things. And if you get interrupted with certain other interruptions, say you're going second and you're not able to set up all your negates and pops and everything else, it is a very, very complicated deck to deal with or to actually play. So that's partially why I want to bring it down a little bit, is just having a good player of that is a little less common. Next, we have Spellbook. Spellbook, I think, it's a weird deck. I think it's extremely good, but at the same time, I think that it's becomes a little easier to play against once you know how to play against it. But that being said, it's still one of the best decks. I'm gonna put it in 1.5. It could go either way. I'm gonna just put it here, but I think these two are sort of tied in a sense. But yeah, next we have 3.5 Axis Fire Fist. I'm gonna put this at the top here of good pilot. I think this deck is fine. The lines are pretty simple. It's just a matter of it doesn't see a lot of representation. I definitely know, like, locally, people who play this, and it is a fine deck. I enjoy playing it as well. It's just, doesn't see as much representation as it should. Next, we have Gravekeeper Artifact. This one's weird. I know a lot of people will want to put it somewhere around like the tier 2-ish. I think this deck is like, I can't see it being on the same level as Lightsworn or Infernity or Sylvan. And that being said, I want to put it at the top of Solid Rogue. I think it's just one of those decks that it gets tops, but it also just doesn't get as much as these decks here. It's a great deck. It's in a weird spot also. I think the Necro Valley errata during this time period, being that cards can leave the grave with their own effect, so like artifacts and stuff, I think that's it's not the best, obviously, but it does still the Necro Valley stops a lot of cards still in the format, such as like Soul Charge, the Dragon Rulers if they're in graveyard, or even if they're in hand trying to summon, you can't banish the ones from grave. So I think it's a very, very good deck. It just I can't see it comparing necessarily with these ones above it. Worms, worms are interesting actually. I want to say solid rogue, but at the same time, I'll put it at good pilot. I haven't really seen Worms top anytime recently. I think it's a great deck. Again, it just I haven't seen much play of this. I played against it a couple times online, and they didn't do so well. But other than that, I think it's still a completely fine deck. Twilight. Twilight, I'm gonna put at the top of Solid Rogue. This deck has actually done kind of decent. I think recently, at the time of recording this, it actually got like a top 8 finish at a online tournament. So that's pretty solid. The list was kind of similar to mine that I had online too, playing some tech cards that I hadn't seen much play of before my build came out, so that was kind of cool. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but whatever. Very good deck. Spamming level 8 synchros is always good, and this deck can just kind of keep going, so very good deck. Next, Geargia. Geargia is tier 1 in its purest form, and it's just kind of the back and forth with H.A.T and Geargia. That's like the classic rivalry, the Ronaldo and Messi, if you will, of rivalries. And just in general, it's consistent. It can play a lot of back row, and it's very resilient to other decks. Not a whole lot to say about that. After that, we have Ghostrix Spirit. This is a very solid rogue deck. I think I'm going to move it here just because it doesn't see as much play, but at the same time, it's a great deck. I was playing this recently, actually, in person, and it was a ton of fun, and just the amount of advantage this deck can get. The Ghostrix are so annoying for the opponent, but it feels so good playing them and just always having a body on board. Crazy, crazy deck. I like it a lot. Next, we have Fire King. Fire King's weird. I want to say it kind of feels like Gadget, where it's like a solid rogue option, but at the same time, it just doesn't see as much representation much. So that's kind of like the issue with it in a sense. So I want to say it's either going to be at the top of solid or of good pilot or the end of solid rogue. I'm just trying to think here where I realistically see this, and yeah, that one's kind of tough. I'm gonna say that it falls kind of the same with Gadgets, so we'll put it here at Solid Rogue. Again, it's one of those decks. I don't know how I really can explain it. Like, it can play the hands, it can play skill drain. Like, there's not a whole lot of reasons why it wouldn't be good. It feels like it's just in an awkward spot to me. After that, we have Evil Swarm. Evil Swarm is definitely a solid tier 2 deck. With a good pilot, this deck is insane, and it feels like every day there's a new tech card that gets played in this. For example, I have a video coming out on a specific trap card that someone had commented on one of my videos, and I had already been looking into it. It's a great deck, especially with if you look at some of these higher decks on the list here. For example, Lightsworn Ruler, Ophion hits it. All the Sylvans, for the most part, are really high level, hits it. This Spellbook, it stops the Priestess at bare minimum, but they have a lot of back row that can deal with it. And then obviously all the artifacts get hit by Ophion. And just it's decks even like Geargia that play like breakthrough skills and fiendishes and all that, they have Pandemic. So very good rogue deck. Well, I wouldn't say rogue, but very good, like, lower level deck compared to what you would usually call like the best decks of the format. Mecha Phantom Beast, I'm not going to cope on this. I think it takes a good pilot, and no pun intended. I'll put it at the end, even though you guys know this is like one of my pet decks. It's just like in a spot where not a lot of people play it, and in general, not a lot of people play it the way I personally think it should be played. They usually go with a more synchro build, which I do have a synchro build. I've talked about it plenty of times, but In general, yeah, it doesn't see a lot of play. After that, we have Battling Boxer. Battling Boxer, I actually really like. Back in the day, despised this deck. One of my friends, he always played it, and it was just so annoying to deal with. But that being said, with the right build, it is very good. I want to say it's somewhere between solid rogue and good pilot. It hasn't got a top in quite a while, so I'm going to put it in good pilot, but I'm going to put it kind of towards the front here. It's a very good deck, but again, it just doesn't see as much representation as it could. It can play floodgates like crazy too, so like this deck's wild. After that, we have Constellar Artifact. Great deck. Really cool deck. I know there's a big fan base for this deck, and I think it's a lot of fun. I don't want to say like it's a really weird spot to put this. I don't want to say like maybe I guess I'd put it in like a tier 2. It's definitely not, like, at the top. I'd put it closer to here. If there was a tier somewhere in between Solid Rogue and tier 2, in my opinion, it would probably fall somewhere there, and I say that simply just because I don't know, it feels like a deck that you see enough. It just it's not taking the top of the top spots that often, but in general, I think it's a great deck. Pleiades is a crazy card, and playing the artifacts in any deck is usually pretty solid, so can't really complain there. After that, we have Koikimiru. Koikimiru is definitely a solid rogue. The deck is great. Where on here I like when you get to the top 3, you don't really wanna say which is better. It just feels like they're all just good. So, with that being said, I will put this in between here. Again, these 3 are all very similar. Most of the decks in the tiers are gonna be very close, so, like, don't even necessarily pay attention to, "Oh, I put Infernity ahead of this," or "Worm ahead of this." They're all in the same category, and again, they're all very solid decks. I'm not saying any of these are bad. After that, we have Noble Knight. Noble Knight, I'm gonna say in its purest form, needs a good pilot. In the artifact version of it, I think I personally have problems with it, but I can't deny that it is a good deck. I've definitely played against it and got completely destroyed by it. So at most, I'm going to say it's solid rogue, but for the most part, I'll put it in good pilot just because that's what I think of it. After that, we have Madolche. Madolche is a great deck. I think this is a deck that's a solid tier 2. It doesn't get as much representation as I wish it would. And I don't just say that because I like the Madolche deck as a whole. I say that just because it is a really good deck. Being able to play the hands, hand traps, and just Angeli into Hoot Cake, just getting you free advantage. Chateau is a crazy card. Ticket's a crazy card. It just Tiramisu. Every card feels so much better than anything else. It's just you have to play a couple bricks, and then also just the player base for it isn't as big as it could be. But great deck. I think it's a really solid option. Here we have Gishki. I'm gonna take this as Zealgigas Turbo. And with that being said, I'm gonna say that this needs a good pilot. Um, it's a great deck. I think even the Hieratic version would probably also still go in good pilot for now. It's not super represented. I think the deck can be really good. I was playing against a guy a few weeks ago who was really good with the deck. We were talking theory and stuff with it, and he played it very smart. He was also getting really lucky with his draws, but even then we played multiple games and it was just crazy seeing this deck in its purest form, and when it does its thing, it does its thing. Next, Dark World. A lot of people never really considered this deck as often, and then, I made a deck profile on it. More and more people started messaging me about it, and now it feels like every time I play online, I am finding someone playing this deck, and I can definitely say I've been completely blown out by it. It's another deck that just has cards that are so good. Gates of Dark World is a crazy card. The amount of draw power this deck puts up. Um, some of the floodgates it can play, just skill drain being an annoying card in general, and just it can get a lot of advantage. And for that reason, I am going to put this in solid rogue. I could definitely see this moving up in the tier list if enough people start like picking up on that. I know that I told you guys that I have a trap version of the deck, and I do plan to put that out at some point. I just have a lot of other deck profiles and things I want to get to first, but it is going to be there. It's, I haven't forgotten. So, crazy deck. I think it's so cool. Next, we have Mermail. Mermail is, again, just a solid deck. I want to say this would fall somewhere in between here, but for now, I'll put it in the tier 1. The deck is just so consistent, even with the couple hits that this deck has in hat format. So things like Abyss Gun and Dragoons at 1. I think this deck is still just so good. It can play through back row extremely well because of the Atlanteans, and even then against face up cards, there's an Atlantean for that. Resource management is crazy in this deck. It feels like it does everything that you need a deck to do, similar to the way Hat does. And for that reason, I am gonna, put it in that tier 1. Next, we have Harpy. Harpy is a fan favorite deck for a lot of people, and I'm gonna go and put it in good pilot. It's in a weird place. I always talk about this. There is a artifact version and a regular version, and then the regular version is split into, are you playing the dragon package or not? And I think in all its variations, it's just a good pilot deck. If you know what you're doing, it's great. If not, it just feels like you can kind of get lost in the rest of the meta. So I think good pilot is a great place to have it. Cyber Dragon Artifact is definitely a solid rogue option. I think this deck is really good. It can be so annoying to go against once they start going off. Um, the amount of rank 5s it can make. Cyber Dragon, was it Nova, the Xyz, is a crazy card. The possession rulings and stuff are a nightmare with this, and it never feels like it's doing a lot until, the network resolves, and then it feels like you somehow, are completely out of the game. So, solid rogue for sure on that. Next, we have Quasar. Quasar, I'm going to just put in good pilot at the front. This deck, I've talked about it a lot. It's not in a great place in hat format, but what it is a crazy deck that needs a lot of skill to play. And that's like basically the epitome of what it means to be a good pilot with a deck, is just knowing all the lines and being a good player in general. So, good pilot is the perfect place for that to be. Next, we have Geargia Karakuri. This is definitely worse than regular Geargia, and for that, I'm gonna put it in tier 2. I almost want to put this in solid rogue, but I believe, I forget what it was. Someone recently topped with my exact list that I had posted, for the main deck, and extra was exactly the same. And then obviously I don't post side decks for a handful of reasons, so that was all on them. But very cool deck. It's not terrible. Having to play the Karakuri stuff can be a brick at times, and losing a little harder to max C. But when this deck goes off, it goes off. And, Trap Stun is a crazy card, and this deck, compared to regular Geargia, does play Trap Stun usually. So that's really cool. It helps against a lot of rogue stuff, because a lot of rogue stuff, the reason they end up working is just because they throw a lot of traps into it. So I think Geargia Karakuri is a very solid tier 2. After that, we have Hieratic Ruler. Hieratic Ruler, I'm going to put in. I don't want to put it in solid rogue, but I don't necessarily think it's tier 2. I think out of Hieratic Ruler and Mythic Ruler, Hieratic Ruler is definitely the weaker of the two. That being said, I'm gonna put it like here in tier 2. Again, this should probably be closer to like a solid rogue in my opinion, though it does get tops. It's just maybe I'm being a little biased on this one. But I think it just feels like this is where I'd want to put it. Again, solid rogue would be like pretty all right to put it in as well. It's just I don't know. I guess maybe that's just my preference. After that, we have Cat. I don't want to be biased about this. and go through the whole hat versus cat debate. I'm just going to put this here, and I'm going to say that these are kind of grouped together just as artifact trap tricks. There's reasons why hat is better than cat and cat's better than hat. I'll probably end up at some point just making a video to talk about that, just because you could just have the debate forever on that. And then I don't even want to get into the fact there's the Curry Bandit build that's also technically cat because it's a K. It's a whole mess. So for that being said, I am gonna put it, just group these together. Mythic Ruler. Mythic Ruler, I'm going to put right here in tier 1.5. It's a very complicated deck. It takes a good pilot, but it's seen enough that people top with it that sometimes, even if you're not the greatest pilot with it, sometimes it just does its thing. So definitely right there. And with that being said, I kind of almost want to move Sylvan up. We could put Sylvan here. Like I was saying it when I had Sylvan, that it kind of was here. I think all this makes a little more sense now. Yeah, I would say somewhere around here. Plant Princess, or Princess Plant Turbo, whatever it's called. I really like this deck. This has become a deck that I think is really enjoyable to play. But with that being said, do I think it's great? I would say it's solid rogue. It definitely needs more representation. I'm going to throw it at the end. Again, it might be moved up closer to somewhere in the middle here. I've played this deck a lot. It can be a little bricky, but you play enough cards that unbrick your hand early enough that it's actually like really good. So I'm going to put it here for now. Or I guess probably it will just stay in solid rogue. I would like to see this deck see more play. It takes the right format for it to see play. Like I would say maybe if you see more things like Sylvan popping off more, then you would probably see this kind of fall into the same category because they have very similar game plans in a sense where, you can just kind of put up big bodies and sit on them. You can also just make like really powerful Xyz and different things. Crazy deck, but I would say right there. Next, we have Heraldic. Heraldic, I actually think is really good. I'm gonna put this here at the end. I'll move it up a little bit. I think this deck needs more representation also. Like some of these decks towards the tail end here, they're really good decks and it's clear because they top enough versus like some of these solid rogues only are like once or twice you'll see them. And just in general, I think the power level between these decks versus these is noticeable. I think from each tier you see a noticeable difference, or hopefully you would. Again, all of these are really good. If you guys want me to do like a real like low tier rogue type one, or just like low tier where we're doing like, tier E, F, G type of thing, I can definitely do that because there are a lot of decks that just basically are non-existent just because they're that bad. There's definitely some that have potential, but it also, again, just comes down to the player. But I would say I'm going to lock it in at this. This is my meta tier list for hat format. Let me know if you guys agree on it, or hopefully, my bit of explanation can kind of help, make it sound a bit better for you guys. Again, all of these are great, but let me know in the comment section, or if I missed a deck that you wanted to see or would like my opinion on, definitely comment that down below and I will try to answer your comment. Usually I'm pretty good on that. And so yeah, no, make sure you drop a like on this video, comment any questions or videos you'd like to see in the future, share this video with your friends, let them kind of react to it as well. I would love to see that. And share this video with them. I already said that. Subscribe to the channel. I think we're all good. I will see you guys in the next video.